We do want to cross now live to Middle East peace negotiator and former special assistant to President Obama, Ambassador Dennis Ross Davidson, distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, speaking to us from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ross, for your time this evening. We really do appreciate it. And before we discuss the what, the essence of the disagreement, if you will, let's talk about the how. It's not the first time there are differences between Washington and Jerusalem, but what do you make of the way Washington is treating Jerusalem at the moment? Do you think it is being handled well?
Well, I think we have to look at several different dimensions of the relationship. On the one hand, I can tell you the level of cooperation between the militaries, the security establishments, the intelligence organizations, it has never been better. It's never been more extensive. The kinds of exercises, military exercises we're seeing now are completely unprecedented. So to look at it from the standpoint of the security dimension of the relationship, you'd have to say it's unbelievably strong. Now, if you look at it from the standpoint of the relationship at the political level, there obviously are some issues. Now, on the one hand, you have a president of the United States who I think is the only president of the United States who has ever called himself a Zionist.
Right.
He calls himself a Zionist because he believes that the Jewish people have the absolute right to have a homeland and Israel is their homeland. And he believes in that. So you have someone who is emotionally connected to Israel, but he also feels, he sees all the turmoil in Israel right now. And on the issue of the judicial reform or the judicial overhaul, whatever one calls it, his basic attitude is, look, it's not up to me to determine for Israel what the relationship is between its basic institutions. But if you're going to make a fundamental change that could affect the separation of powers, it's not the sort of thing that can be done by simply imposing it. So he's been saying, look, as Israel's friend, I say as your friend, when you deal with judicial reform and you're going to change the relationship between institutions, it has to reflect a broad consensus in the country. What that reform will be, it's up to you to decide. How you do it, ultimately, it's up to you to decide. But as your friend, I see a reality that when you try to impose something like this, you divide the country. That doesn't make Israel stronger. Israel is a country with whom we share fundamental values, but we also share interests, and a strong Israel is in America's interest. So that's part of what's going on with President Biden. The other part of it is also he looks at the makeup of the current Israeli government, and he looks at ministers like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. He sees the things they say. You have Smotrich who says there's no such thing as a Palestinian people. You look at their reaction to not just the building in the territories, but also their reaction to the behavior of extremist settlers. And so this is also something that is a source of concern. One of the things that Prime Minister Netanyahu told the president early on, he said, it'll be my policy, my hands are on the steering wheel. Right. And I think one of the things that President Biden is seeking is more of a demonstration, at least from his standpoint, that it's Prime Minister Netanyahu who is in fact driving this car and he's not only applying the brakes.
And in this respect, Ambassador Ross, perhaps the symbolic yet important meeting is taking place today, but not less important is the phone call that happened last night between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And Ambassador, help us translate Diplo lingo to human lingo, if you will. What do you make of the different versions of the aftermath statements coming out from the White House and Jerusalem? And I am inviting some media critique here, if you will. Are we making too much fuss over the yes meeting, no meeting between Biden and Netanyahu in this respect?
Well, I think the fact that there has not been a meeting yet is something that is hard to disguise. I mean, the reality is you have an Israeli government that's been in power for 7 months. And the Israeli prime minister has not gone to see the president. Right. So, you look historically and what you see is a certain reality. So it's not, I wouldn't say that you're not creating an issue that doesn't exist.
Right.
Having said that, you have to ask the question, okay, how fundamental is this to the relationship? I would say, look, it's pretty important because there are some issues on which only the president and the prime minister can have the discussion. There are some issues on which only the two of them, need to have a set of understandings with each other. So I do think it is important for there to be a meeting. It's important for there to be a meeting of minds. It's also important to sort of figure out some of the boundaries of where there may be some disagreements, but you're going to manage those disagreements. Look, this relationship is fundamental. There is no relationship that is more important to Israel than the relationship with the United States.
Yeah.
And so managing that, I think, is critically important for any Israeli government.
Hey, I see you liked it. Want more? Just hit the subscribe button right here. Go on. I know you want to.